We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. All of us make choices in life, and when you think about it, it's amazing how many choices we make every day. We are so glad that you chose to open this link to study with us the most important choice Ruth made in her life. In order to do that, we need to know a little background. Ruth's story took place during the time when the judges ruled in Israel. It was a period when God's people continued to move from disobedience to defeat to deliverance. In Ruth 1:1, we will read that because there was a famine in Bethlehem, a man took his wife and 2 sons to live in the country of Moab. The 2 sons got married to locals. The man, Elimelech, died, and then about 10 years later, both of his sons died. That left 3 widows in a desperate situation, especially the mother-in-law, Naomi. She had no social security, nothing but a desperate 80-mile walk to try and find some help. With this background in mind, let's walk through Ruth 1:1-18, to know about the right choices Ruth made in her life. Verse 6 says, "When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there." In the midst of all her sorrows, at least one piece of good news reached Naomi. The famine in Judah had ended, and the writer credited this to a divine visitation by the Lord with renewed rain, crops, and food. Bethlehem could again live up to its name, House of Bread. Hearing that the famine was over in Judah, Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem together with her 2 daughters-in-law. She had relatives in Bethlehem and she could probably find financial support among them. Besides, that was her home, and the conditions that had led her to Moab no longer existed. The land of Moab held no further attraction for her, and she probably wanted to forget it. Verse 7 says, "With her 2 daughters-in-law she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah." Having made up her mind to return to Judah, Naomi, along with Orpah and Ruth, her 2 daughters-in-law, left Moab. These 3 women, united by a common grief, the death of their husbands, went on the way to return to the land of Judah. The willingness of Naomi's daughters-in-law to break ties with their homeland and go to an alien culture also gives evidence of a close bond of loyalty. Their affection for Naomi speaks well of their character. They would be facing an uncertain future, but they were determined to face it together. Verse 8 says, "Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, 'Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me.'" As they headed out of Moab, Naomi recognized the difficulties Orpah and Ruth would face in Israel. They were young Moabite women with hopes of remarrying and raising families. But their prospects of finding husbands in Bethlehem were slim because of cultural barriers. So Naomi released them from any obligation to her and said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to your mother's house." As she asked them to return home, Naomi invoked the first of 2 blessing upon them. It is significant that after at least 10 years in Moab, she was still firm in her faith in Yahweh. It was his blessing that she pronounced on them, not that of the Moabite god Chemosh. For Naomi, there was only one God and he was sovereign in every nation. First, she asked the Lord to bless them just as their dead husbands. Ruth and Orpah obviously had been good wives to Naomi's sons, judging from the kindness she felt toward them. In addition, Naomi prayed that God would extend his covenant love to foreigners, Ruth and Orpah, as well. She had seen this same kindness in them, which they had displayed to their husbands and her. In essence, Naomi felt that she and her daughters-in-law had joined in a mother-daughter covenant of love. Verse 9 says, "May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye and they wept aloud. Naomi's second blessing was that these women would find security and a restful life in the house of their future husbands. In their case, it meant being released from the worries and troubles being a widow would bring. Marriage was a woman's greatest security, and Naomi wanted that for her daughters-in-law. She knew the chances of them finding husbands in Israel were quite small. their Moabite culture would provide greater opportunities for remarriage. So she kissed them, and in a final farewell they all lifted up their voice, and wept together, indicating very loud crying or wailing. Under normal circumstances, this would appear to be the end of the story, but God had much more in mind. Verse 10 says, "And said to her, We will go back with you to your people." Both women assured Naomi that they wanted to return to her homeland with her. They were willing to leave behind everything that was familiar to them to accompany Naomi to Judah and stay with her and her people, the Jews. Verse 11 says, "But Naomi said, Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons, who could become your husbands?" Again Naomi told the two women to turn back and stay in their own land with their own families. She indicated her deep affection for them by calling them my daughters. They were truly family members in her mind, and no doubt it was painful for her to suggest that they return home. Naomi was reminded of the law of Levirate marriages, which said, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Deuteronomy 25:5. So, Naomi pointed out that she had no other sons, nor would she ever have any who they would be willing to wait for to marry them. Verse 14 says, "At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her." Sensing this was the final goodbye, the three women lifted up their voice, and wept again in the typical loud wailing that was common in that culture. Here it describes the deep sorrow of imminent parting. But the two women had different reactions. Orpah's action indicated that she was returning to her home, for all that is said about her is that she kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to Naomi, indicating that she was going to stay with her, sticking to Naomi like glue. It appears that Orpah wanted to be a wife again, but Ruth wanted to be a daughter. Her action of cleaving to Naomi was a declaration of her determination to continue to go on with her. Verse 15 says, "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." Naomi continued to try to persuade Ruth to return to her home in Moab. She said to Ruth, "Your sister-in-law is going back to her people, and to her gods." Naomi then encouraged Ruth to do the same thing by saying, "Return with your sister-in-law." Naomi was trying to convince Ruth to go back to Moab with Orpah. Verse 16 says, "But Ruth replied, Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go I will go, and where you stay I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God my God." By now, Ruth had heard 3 pleas from her mother-in-law to return home to Moab. But now she would no longer hear it. Her mind could not be changed. In one of the most beautiful expressions of commitment in the entire world's literature, Ruth chose life with Naomi over her own family, over her own national identity, and over her religious idolatry. She said to Naomi, "Don't urge me to leave you, or to turn back from you." For Ruth, this phrase has more meaning than just following or going to Judah with Naomi. What she really meant was a promise to accompany Naomi on her homeward journey wherever that might lead. Ruth was willing to face the same dangers, experience the same needs, and suffer the same fatigue as Naomi would on their journey. Then Ruth said, "And where you stay, I will stay." She was willing to live wherever Naomi decided to make her home. She also said, "Your people will be my people." She would give up her Moabite culture and adopt the culture in Israel, making a clean break with the heritage of her past. In essence, she would live as a Jew. Ruth realized that identifying with Israel also meant breaking with the idolatrous religious views of the Moabites. So finally she said, "And your God will be my God." Evidently, Ruth had seen a spiritual dimension in the lives of Naomi and her family that she wanted for herself. Either she already had come to trust the Lord, or she was at that moment declaring her trust in Him. Her knowledge of the true God, Yahweh, or Jehovah, may have been elementary, but she declared lifelong allegiance to Him. Verse 17 says, where you die I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Ruth was so intent on keeping her word that she was willing to die and be buried in the same place as Naomi. She wouldn't even ask for her body to be returned to Moab for burial. Instead, she would be so closely identified with Naomi and her people that she would be buried near her. Ruth was not satisfied with just promising these things, she sealed her vow with an oath. Ruth invoked judgment from God if she ever broke the promise she was making at that time. Ruth didn't swear by any of her native gods, but by the name of the God of Israel. She used his covenant name, Yahweh, again indicating her personal commitment to him. She recognized that Jehovah is more than a mere tribal deity of Israel, for she expected him to pursue and punish her wherever she might be if she should break her promise to Naomi. This was final proof that Ruth was once and for all forsaking her pagan ways and declaring complete allegiance to Naomi and her God. This was Ruth's conversion to Jehovah, the God of Israel. Verse 18 says, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Naomi had been sincere when she advised Ruth to do what she believed was in her daughter-in-law's best interests, return home. She was not trying to test Ruth's true feelings. But now, this verse tells us that Naomi realized that Ruth had no intentions of going back home. She was fully determined to accompany Naomi to Judah, that nothing was going to stop her from what she wanted to do. When Naomi recognized how deep Ruth's conviction to go with her was, she ended all attempts to convince Ruth to change her mind and return to her homeland. There was nothing more to say about the matter after hearing Ruth's solemn oath, so Naomi gave in, and the two of them went on their way to Bethlehem, Ruth 1:19. Key verse. Where you go I will go, and where you stay I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God my God, Ruth 1:16. We have to marvel at the loyalty of Ruth that led her to put another's interests above her own and even to give up her cultural identity. Ruth's strong and faithful devotion to Naomi is still seen as model behavior today. Her willingness to abide by Jewish customs goes to the point where she later converts to Judaism. Ruth's example shows that faith and persistence break boundaries and let us to live new lives. Thought to remember. God uses the faithful to help those in need. Many times as Christians, we are searching for huge ways to show God's love to others. We have visions of doing grand things such as adopting a child, or going to a calamity area to help with disaster relief. Those of us who are blessed to have more than enough to meet our basic needs, should always be willing to share with others who are not. However, small, personal sacrifices are what pleases God and impacts our brothers. Our lesson next week is entitled, A Covenant to Marry. Our biblical reference is Ruth 31, 6, 8, 12, 16, 18. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Cubao Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.